Good morning, everyone. Okay. That's all right. Taking a minute. Um, we'll try that again. I heard one person. Good morning. We are so grateful to have you at this session today. You are definitely in for a treat. The title of our session is called Promising Practices for Course Marking at Independent Institutions. And this is just a friendly reminder that the Code of Conduct is still in effect. So please keep that in mind. And at this time, we have a 40-minute session for you. And I am going to turn the floor over to our speakers.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks everyone for coming to our session on course marking. My name is Lindsey Gwozdz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm delighted to be here today with my colleagues, Laura Robert-Rivera. She is the Senior Project Manager at the New England Board of Higher Education, and Virginia Clinton-Lisell is an Associate Professor at the University of North Dakota. So we're going to be talking to you about course marking, but we wanted to first back up and start with our organization because we recognize that not everyone is familiar with what a regional compact is. So the New England Board of Higher Education is one of the regional compacts. And I'm going to hand it over to Laura because she does a much better job at explaining what it is than I do.
Thank you for that introduction, Lindsey. So to start us off, a little bit about NEBI. NEBI works across 6 New England states to help policymakers and institutional leaders at more than 240 institutions access, develop, and implement sound educational practices and policies. Among our various our various initiatives, we've been working on advancing and scaling open education in the Northeast. Our organization specifically has looked for ways to assist in and build upon the coordinated state initiatives, develop policy frameworks, share promising practices, and ultimately accelerate the integration of open education to promote equitable access for students. We also worked side by side with our other 3 regional compacts, the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, the Southern Regional Educational Board, and the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education to further open education nationally. Now I will pass it back up to Lindsey to share more about our recent work.
Thanks, Laura. And I did want to just clarify, so I kind of wear 2 different hats. I am the Assistant Dean of the Library at the Community College here in Rhode Island, but I've been working with NEBI as a fellow for open education since 2019, helping them to just kind of understand how they fit into the open education space because the regional compacts are fairly new players here. So we're really still trying to figure out where we are and what we're doing. But yeah, so if you don't know what course marking is, I'm just going to give you a really baseline kind of definition so we're all on the same page. Course marking is a way to assign a specific searchable attribute in the student information system. So at your college, that might be Banner or PeopleSoft or something else that students use to search and register for courses. So today we're specifically talking about course marking in the context of open educational resources and other no-cost learning materials, but course marking is not a new thing that colleges do. Colleges use it to help students search and register for courses that maybe fulfill a general education requirement or maybe a service learning requirement. So not new, but in the context of today, what we will be talking about is the work we've done to help institutions assign a no-cost course marking designation. So that encompasses both OER and also other no-cost learning materials like library learning resources or library license resources or any other free materials that don't have a direct cost to the student. And I did want to just say NEBI has been focusing on course marking for the last 2 years because in our region in New England, we have made really good strides in awareness of OER with faculty and adoption, but there has been a disconnect between how do students find the faculty who are doing this work? How do I get into a class that uses OER? I don't even know what OER is as a student. So how do we kind of connect and bridge the two? So that's where our interest has come in. Let's see. Okay, so for our work, we've identified kind of 2 overarching benefits that we see course marking fulfills. So for one, it's a way to amplify redistributive justice. So if you're familiar with Lambert's framework, connecting students to resources that don't have costs, and also giving them agency. So when they're signing up for their courses, they can make their own decisions on behalf of their own independent financial situations, because we know that what's affordable for one student might not be affordable for the next student. So it's a way to support that, but it's also a way to help us in the field measure student success metrics. So without course marking, it's very difficult to measure the impact that OER adoption or open educational practices has on student learning, and things like persistence and graduation rates, retention, all those things that our administrators really want to hear. If they're investing in something like OER, they want to know that it's benefiting their students in a positive way. So course marking is a way to do that. It creates these systems for data collection and analysis. And you may have noticed that our talk is course marking at independent institutions, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of context of why we're focusing on that. Here in New England, we have about 240 institutions. That's a lot for a small geographical region, and over 61% of them are independent or private. So when I say independent, I'm talking about a private nonprofit institution. Often liberal arts plays a big role there. And we've seen a lot of, I'll back up before I get there. We've seen a lot of traction in New England, specifically in Massachusetts and Connecticut, with course marking. The Massachusetts system has done a great job. Also, the Connecticut State University and College System, CSCU, I always mess it up. CSCU, whatever that stands for. They have done a fantastic job implementing course marking. Both of those are public systems. We don't really see that work happening in the independent sector, but we also know that the independents enroll students who have financial barriers also, and that's often not looked at and supported. So we wanted to provide some case studies that we could give back to the community to say, hey, you can also do that at independent institutions, and this is what it might look like. So for us to learn more, we partnered with 4 independent institutions in the Northeast. I say the Northeast and not New England because one of our institutions on the screen here is in New York, and New York is not part of New England. Little nuance, but you don't really care. No one cares about that. But the New England Board, I say that because the New England Board of Higher Education, along with our other regional compacts, there's 4 in the US, like Laura mentioned, a state has to go through Congress to join a compact. So there's legislation to make that happen. There are 3 states in the US that are not members of compacts: New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. I think that's the only 3. I'm looking at Allison too, because you might know that. But we often include New York and New Jersey, and now, recently, as of Monday, Pennsylvania in our open education portfolio at NEBI. They're not members of NEBI, but we 100% see the value in including them in our conversations and community of practice. So yes. So these are the 4 institutions that we partnered with. The first one is New England College, which is in New Hampshire. The second, Thomas College, which is in Waterville, Maine. Johnson and Wales University is here in Providence, Rhode Island. Hey, I see Jenny over there, used to be there. And St. John Fisher University, which is our New York institution. And I put a few quick demographic data points on the screen for you just to show you that independent institutions have students with financial barriers too. And that was a big piece that helped us identify partners in this work. We really wanted to ensure that we were going to be reaching a student body with some need. Now I'm going to hand it over to Laura to talk more about how we engage with these institutions, what kind of support they received, and what we asked of them in terms of commitment.
So with the generous support of the Hewlett Foundation, we collaborated with the 4 institutions that you recently saw to help learn more about the actual resources, timeline, and practices that are involved in course marking. So within the year, 4 institutions implemented a no-cost course marking designation, and most of them actually ran the program pilot program within 6 months. These institutions were chosen because of their commitment to serving low-income students, having at least 27% of Pell eligibility, demonstrated a commitment to OER. So those were the two major requirements for us to kind of work with these institutions for this grant. And in that process, they committed to creating, again, the bigger one, a student-facing no-cost designation in their student information system by the spring of 2024. This was simultaneously tagged on the back end as OER and no cost. We wanted to make sure that even though for the students, it might not have been, they didn't necessarily need to know the nuances of it, we were tracking the differences on the back end. We also required them to have a cross-departmental participation. We suggested that these teams needed to involve at least a registrar and an admin, higher level leadership. And that proved to be very essential in this process. And then we asked them to participate in a community practice. I will be going more in detail about this community practice and the best learnings that we had from it. But this community practice included going to an in-person retreat, a kickoff retreat. We had community calls every other month, and we had an online resource sharing community, aka Microsoft Teams, where they were encouraged to share all of the resources they created and license it by CC BY. And then initially, among our, oh, my bad, so sorry. Okay, I'm trying to look. Okay, thank you for your patience. And then, given that our primary goal was to understand the implications of a course marking, institutions committed to distributing a voluntary student survey and submitting a midterm and final report. So for these commitments, institutions were supported by NEBI through the following ways. So we offered them a modest amount of funding. That's the big star. And initially, we thought that these funds would be critical for the institutions to be able to code their designation and offset the cost of the registrar's time. However, we learned that this code was not that heavy of a lift. In fact, most of the funds went to create incentives for faculty to integrate OER into their courses and foster collaboration amongst them, and then creating awareness amongst the students. That was probably the biggest heavy lift. And then other than monetary support, we provided them with a course marking liaison who had vast experience in implementing course marking at their own institution, and they met monthly with each institution to provide institution-specific support. And we provided institutions with a roadmap, which was a checklist guide to help institutions embark on this journey. You can view it on our website. We're going to share the resources at the end of the presentation. But just to give you a brief overview, the first primary recommendation step that we had was establish a team, identify the key stakeholders, their role and responsibilities, standardize communications, set a regular meeting. The second step was develop the process. So define OER and what no cost means at your institution. That was a big hurdle, but that was an essential step that institutions needed to take. We encouraged them to build upon existing registration workflows to add OER and this designation within the faculty's process that already existed to collect, so that it didn't interfere with the process. This was, again, another big part of the workload, and that also included having to create some change management, giving some foresight into the process. We're going to go and share these all over again, but I wanted to highlight what that was in the roadmap, and then just run some tests, do some pilot programs, and then we then had finally the process of outreach, and that included involving all the necessary stakeholders, student, faculty, staff, admin, and then creating marketing campaign. From there, they launched all of these tools were more of it's not an exhaustive list, but it was definitely a starting off point for our institutions. In addition to these resources, our biggest probably value added was the community of practice. Here we try to illustrate the value of the semi-structured cross-institutional community of practice. As I mentioned earlier, we met every other month, and during that time, we shared knowledge, collaboratively problem solved. In each meeting, we kind of dove into one of the specific implementation and their process. So here, in this graph, you'll kind of find that what worked really well about this community of practice was the flow of knowledge and sharing. The institutions learned from NEBI, but we learned from them, and that's why you see those arrows going both ways. And then they learned from the liaisons who were bringing knowledge from outside in their experience. They collaborated in the center, and now NEBI has the opportunity to share out these learning back into the community. So that's a visual of what we hope to communicate. So I will now be sharing it, and now Virginia will be sharing a little bit more about that distribution survey that I mentioned earlier, because again, the point was to gather as much information from this process as possible.
Okay, so what did the students have to say? Well, first, a little background about the methodology for the survey. So when students, they received an email from their course administration. It did not come from us. We wanted to make sure that they received it from somebody at their campus. And the beginning information in the survey, if they chose to participate, went over consent and guidelines as far as the risks and benefits. Then there were questions asking them about how important various factors were in terms of course selection and how much they spent on course textbooks in a given term, and approximately how much time they engaged in cost-saving attempts. So shopping at different stores, looking at line, going to see if the library had a copy. There were several different options. And that was to give us an idea of the cost of time, not just the cost of money for the books. We asked them about their experiences with course marking. If they were aware of course marking, they were shown a screenshot of how course marking looked in their course registration system, and asked, like, did you notice this? And if you knew about it, how did you know about it? And if you used it, what were your experiences with it? At the end, we asked them about their demographics, and they went on a separate link that was not connected with their answers, where they provided their email address and provided a $20 gift card as a thank you for participating. So generally speaking, students were not that aware. Less than a third said that they even knew that the filter existed, which was a little disappointing, but quite frankly, it's hard to get students' attention. They have a lot of information going at them, and it's really difficult to get them to learn about something new, especially if they're already familiar with course registration. Only 10% use the filter, and we'll go into reasons as to why in a little bit. As far as who told them about the filter, for those who did know, they said their advisor, student organizations, peers, social media. One student said their mom. There was the list of the other ways that students learned about course marking. It seemed that maybe some institutions' platforms were more intuitive because there were differences in how many students just noticed it or figured it out themselves when they registered for classes. We also were wondering, as far as that question about, like, what is the impact of the cost of course materials on students at independent colleges, which, as Lindsey mentioned, is a question that is not looked at very much. We wanted to delve specifically into students who have been traditionally underserved in higher education and who likely have more financial barriers to completing their college education. So we specifically looked at Pell recipients and non-Pell recipients. And what we found was that Pell recipients reported that they spent more time and effort trying to save money on course materials. The cost of learning materials was more stressful for them. And when compared to other factors that mattered as far as course selection. So we asked about the instructor, the time of day, the location on campus, modality, and another one was whether or not it fulfilled a requirement. Fulfilling a requirement was definitely the most important, but cost was pretty up there too. But for the Pell Grant recipient students, they rated cost as being a more significant factor when deciding to register for classes than non-Pell recipients.
Thanks, Virginia. What did we learn? We've kind of come up with 10 promising practices that even if you're not at an independent institution, I think many of these will be very relevant to your own work. And as Laura said, these will be on our website too, but we're going to walk through them. I'm going to do the first 5, and then Laura will do the last 5. And hopefully I can make some connections why we put these up here. So number 1 is we think it's really important, if you're going to do this work, you need to form a cross-functional team at your institution, and or if it's, system, whatever you're doing, that includes representation from all relevant departments and stakeholders, including, we really stress this, some senior leadership and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, or equity-focused roles. You need some higher level champions on your team to push this work forward. It stalls a lot, and we need these leaders and stakeholders to say, this is important to our institution. They can communicate it to the faculty, they can communicate it to staff and other stakeholders that why they're doing it, why it's tied to their own strategic goals. We need kind of that voice. 2 of our institutions that we worked with, Thomas College and St. John Fisher, their provosts were on the team, and they were like leading this work specifically. And we noticed that was really important in helping to move that forward. Even if people left the team, these folks were like, we're doing this, I've committed this. They have money in academic affairs. They can kind of distribute it out to support faculty in this work. So it's really important. Number 2, implement robust documentation and communication strategies to mitigate the impact of team changes. We saw a lot of turnover. I'm looking at Jenny. Jenny was on our team at Johnson & Wales. She's now at Wheaton College. And we're very happy for her. But we saw a lot of turnover, and you all are very familiar with administrative turnover and just turnover in general in higher ed. And that can often stall the good work that you're doing. So documenting your processes and making it really easy for the next person that steps in to understand what you're doing is important. And I think we all know that, but we wanted to highlight it. Number 3, develop clear definitions for no cost, and if you're doing low cost, we specifically focused on no cost, but course materials, and ensure anyone involved in marking or reviewing tag courses is on the same page. So Laura mentioned that a requirement for these institutions that we had was to participate in an in-person retreat as a team. So we carved out time during that day to have the team sit together and say, okay, y'all need to figure out your own institutional definitions. What are you talking about when you say no cost? What does that include? What are you talking about when you say OER? Because there were a lot of people on the teams themselves that they were very new to OER. Most of the registrars had no idea what OER was. It's really important that everyone understands, because there's when you have lots of cooks in the kitchen, you need to all be speaking the same language, especially the process of collecting the data to hand over to the registrar, like who's using OER in the classroom. There's a lot of like individual decisions being made. Is this OER? I don't know. Like that person needs to know what that is, and they need to know what your institution is including in no cost, if that's an umbrella that you're using. Also, a lot of institutions brought up the fact that we all struggle with sometimes is, well, this class, they need to buy a calculator or they need to buy some kind of lab materials. Are we including that in here? They had a lot of really hard conversations to like parse out what is included. So everyone needs to be on the same page of what is included in your own institutional definition and then put it somewhere so students can click and say, like, what does no cost mean? Like, what is this? And I will just say, even though this regranting program didn't focus on low cost, it was not a focus. We didn't spend much time on it. A few of our institutions did opt to do a low-cost filter as well. It was important to them, and they know their institutions best, so we kind of just said, here are some resources. But I did want to share out, like, it's important to, in the definition development phase, if you are looking at low cost, how are you coming to that number? Who are you including in that decision? Include students. And be very clear about where you're getting the information. I don't know how to explain that, but I'll give you an example. So Thomas College did opt to do a low-cost filter. I don't remember what their number was. We'll just say $50 for a round cost. But for them, they had to go to the college bookstore. They have an online bookstore. That was their indicator of cost. It wasn't, oh, but on Amazon it's this price, and over here, you can get it for this price. They were just looking at their bookstore. Like, that was the indicator. So if you're doing some kind of low cost, I really encourage you to identify what indicator you are going to use for that data point. Let's see. Number 4, it's always really important to engage your faculty early in the process. Consider offering professional development and addressing concerns directly to foster buy-in. It never feels good to learn about something when it's right in front of you and you're being asked to, like, collect, hey, what are you using? Are you using OER? We have this new course marking thing. Well, what does that mean? Is my colleague's section going to fill over mine because I'm not using OER? Like, let's just get everyone in the room. We can talk about it. So consider hosting some kind of, like, community dialogue where you can answer questions and just be really transparent. Number 5, leverage existing workflows and/or systems to collect, update, and communicate course marking data. So Laura mentioned part of the support that we provided, in addition to monetary support, was just kind of like guidelines, and we strongly recommended at our in-person retreat that they think about what ways they were going to collect this data and use it to communicate with the registrar. And we said, hey, you all are collecting data now to, fill out your course schedules for faculty. Like, what does that look like at your institution? Is it as easy as adding a column onto that spreadsheet that says, are you using no-cost materials, or like whatever that looked like? And all of them said, well, yeah, we already have a workflow. We'll figure out how they can build upon that workflow. It's really important not to recreate the wheel, we don't want to make faculty or the admin assistants, whoever's filling out that information, they shouldn't have to go to one extra place. And that's all I have. I'm going to hand it over to Laura.
You, and please jump in. I want to make sure that we give you as much resources as possible. So number 6 was develop a change management workflow. As we mentioned earlier, there was a lot of turnover within the team, but more importantly, we know that students, teachers, faculties might be changing their course last minute. They might change the materials. Suddenly it's a different course. There's a lot of change that goes on during the registration process and after. So we wanted to make sure that we had some strategy to kind of address this preemptively. And I actually think, Lindsey, if you can elaborate on the specific.
Yeah, sure. So, so Laura said, like, there will be many times where right before the class starts, there's a faculty instructor change, and the student had registered with the understanding there would be no textbook cost. And then they show up to the first day of class and, oops, surprise, there's an instructor cost, or an instructor change and an added cost. So what are you going to do, not only in that moment to support the student, but to anticipate that? So for example, at New England College, the registrar created a report in Argos that spoke to Banner. And anytime there was an instructor change in any of the courses that were tagged as no cost, an automatic report was run weekly, and she would get that to her email and she could say, oh, I need to reach out to this department to say, what are you going to do? Because, for the reasons I just explained. She also suggested they were looking into creating a little, like, fund for students that in cases where that happened, they could get monetary financial support. So consider like talking to the provost and saying, hey, we need some kind of backup plan while we work out the kinks, or this might always happen. So having a backup to support students. We have a really great video on our website, which we're going to link to, where Alex, the registrar at New England College, it's a 1-minute clip where she shows exactly what she did. So.
Thank you. Yes, and that resource, again, we will share after. And then number 7, use a variety of tailored outreach and communication methods to engage different stakeholders. This is really important because we realize that one of the biggest left here is the awareness. So not only the students, which we realize, and I'm going to speak a little bit more in number 8, but also within the faculty, they need to know what it means, which courses marked. Some of the great resources that institutions developed were like flow charts of like, does this course do this? Yes. And then they had another block and some recommendations for it. So providing those definitions for the faculty, engaging them in the conversation early on. And same with admin. That was a really important part in our findings, that cross-functional teams, cross-departmental teams were essential to kind of the success of this work. So outreach communication is an essential part to kind of implementing course marking. Number 8, prioritizing student awareness, how to efficiently navigate the course marking feature with that priority in mind, that this is for the students to be able to identify and make financially sound decisions when they're registering. It is incredibly important for those students to know that this feature exists. The institution as a whole is putting a lot of effort into being able to kind of leverage this for students. So making sure that they are aware. Some ways to do that we found that we're going to leverage moving forward is really engaging student organizations on campus and making sure that they also are an advocate and moving this message forward. And then number 9, prioritize the fund for faculty development. As we said earlier, we were surprised to find that the registrars was not, like, their commitment was not as big of a heavy lift. And we found that spending the funds to kind of support faculty to adopt OER and support the successful implementation of course marking proved to be really beneficial for the whole institution to move this work forward. And number 10 is to seek additional funding. So one of the not only is, it's not that heavy lift of the registrar's time initially and the course designation, but sustaining those workflows, ensuring that those as they are marked are actually OER resources, no cost resources. There's a lot of the back end work that these workflows involve. And so additional funding, kind of securing, sustaining resources into this initiative to make sure that there's sustainability and can expand over time is necessary. It's not from our understanding, we have some numbers of like the cost considerations. It's not, it's not a huge amount, but there's definitely a need for that sustained funding for it. Anything you want to add to these? Okay, beautiful. So on that note, this is the QR code for the resources that we've been talking about. This links to our website. On that main page, it's for the leadership resources. And there you're going to have the webinar recordings that we conducted 3 webinars. And one was getting started with course marking, doing some tech, what was it? Yeah, if you remember the names.
Yeah, the second one was technological considerations. We had 3 different registrars at 3 different institutions show like what they actually have to do.
And then, so those recordings are there. We also have that registrar's 1-minute clip. That's a great resource. The roadmap checklist is on the page, and these recommendations are also shared there. So I encourage you all to use those resources and share them widely, and they are CC BY. So feel free to add to them as you can. We will now take, oh wait, let me make sure. Just so you are all aware, these are the resources that we also pulled from. And then these are some of the ways that we could be reached. That email goes to our entire open education initiative at NEBI. So feel free if you have any questions to reach out there. But we will take questions now from the audience. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. This question is directed to Lindsey. You you mentioned like when you're discussing with somebody who doesn't teach a ZTC class and like, are my colleagues going to be getting a higher enrollment for the course? I was wondering if you could speak more about that because where I am, there's like zero awareness of course markings. We do have it. The professors know maybe more. They have to make note of whether or not it's a ZTC course, but the students don't know. First semester students go through the registrar's office to enroll. And my question becomes, if I want to make course marking awareness, and that means I go to the registrar and say, can you give the students an option when you sit down with them to enroll them? You know, I'm still on tenure track. So that was what I wanted to know more about.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I think it's Thomas College that we worked with. They have a very similar, their first year students are registered either by their advisors. So there is this like weird tension and conflict of interest of like, how are they making those decisions? I think in terms of having conversations with faculty, I always just talk about the benefits to students and giving them more agency to make their own decisions. I'd give them some data points of like how textbook costs are financial barriers to student learning, to student success in general. And I try to tie it really into the mission that the faculty hopefully is already aware of your own institution and the work you're trying to achieve, and just really make those connections and not so much focus on the like concern piece, which is valid. A lot of institutions are downsizing and faculty lines are being cut, and I know that's a concern. So I'm just there to listen to the faculty member. I'm not there to convince them that they should be using OER because they want their section to fill up. That's not why we're here. I'm trying to show them that the benefits of using open educational resources, or in this case, no cost. Like we're not just talking about OER here, how it helps students. It's tricky.
So there's a question online.
Yeah.
Can you share, this is directed towards Virginia. Can you share the research specifically interested in students' priority when registering?
First of all, hi, Julia. Thanks for joining my session. Right now, I'm not sure, do we have anything in shareable? We have something under review. But if you email me directly, I'm pretty easy to Google. There aren't any other Virginia Clinton-Lisells. What? Julia Rodriguez. I am happy to share a private copy, but we don't have anything that we can publicly share yet.
Hi, I have a question about the course marking itself. So we have seen so many different types of course marking. I think initially when we first started this conversation, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe, it was about no cost. And then people said, well, what if you want to buy a print copy? But the real kind of elephant in the room was, oh, we need to include inclusive access because that's low cost. So now we have this confusing mix of low and no cost, and it differs from state to state, from institution to institution. In your opinion, after working with these colleges, do you think we need to kind of come to some agreement about that and try to do something that is more even understandable to students? Because students don't know what low cost is. I can tell you in California community colleges, everybody was using a different number. The faculty senate actually had a number they wanted to use, but it turned out that the student senate got together and came up with a number, and then it was very easy to go and say, we would like to use the student number because it's, and that ended up being $30. But it just feels like we need to kind of maybe as a field come to some agreement. I mean, at least here in the US, a dollar is still a dollar. And anyway, just curious your thoughts after having been delved in this area for so long.
Yeah, and I honestly didn't want to touch the low cost thing with the 10-foot pole, and I specifically wrote this grant to say no cost for that reason. But 3 of our institutions wanted to talk about low cost because that was more palatable to their faculty, which is fine. I will say one stipulation we did have with this grant specifically was inclusive access was not allowed to be a part of this. So that wasn't factored into their low cost. It was strictly like whatever course materials. I do think you're right, Lisa, that we need to, as a field, probably have larger conversations to streamline this and to have a better understanding of what we're talking about. Because I mentioned before, like a lot of times in the definitions, people are still grappling with, do I include like cost of it, like instructional materials, like lab coats and things, like because that is a cost. And what's the difference between that cost barrier and the, learning material, the book or whatever. So I don't have a great answer. I'm kind of beating around the bush. Maybe Laura does, but I just, all that to say, yes, I think we would be wise as a community to have more discussion.
I don't have the answer, but I do think that I did coordinate at some point with Witchy, Liliana Diaz, and she from my understanding, she was doing some work in collecting these definitions and kind of figuring out, oh, I'm not sure exactly if she's doing it through Doers or Witchy, but there was some work being done in that space.
All right, we thank you for your questions. We are at time. If you would, please join me in showing some love for our speakers. All right, enjoy the